Alright, everyone's staying in here. We are going to go ahead and be in Judges. We'll be in Judges chapter 15. We are talking about Samson. Last week we had a rousing round of Samson and all the things that he did. And so far, I have to say that everything Samson has done has been for himself. Just think about it. First thing that we have Samson doing after his birth, which is, predicted by God himself as a miraculous thing. We have him falling in love and wanting to marry a Philistine girl, which is against God's law. We have him trying to cheat his bridal party out of expensive clothing. We have him killing people to get the clothes in order to pay his debt. We have him catching foxes and setting fires to fields. And all in all, he's just been sort of this engine of destruction, bringing mayhem wherever he goes. Now, despite all that, in one way, this would also be looked as heroic. Despite the fact he is maybe doing it for the wrong reasons, and at the wrong time, and in the wrong place, he is still disruptive to the enemies of the people of Israel. And so maybe they would say, even though they might say, hey, we don't agree with how he's doing it, but at least he's doing something. Have you ever felt that way in your life? Let's just take sports because it's an easier example here. Where you have a player on your team and you don't like their personality, you don't like how they behave, you don't like what they say to the press, but man, you like it when they win the game for you. Can anyone give an example here? What would you say?
The refrigerator.
The refrigerator. Yeah, so not a fan of his character, but a fan of how he played the game. Ndamukong Suh, yes, he was another one, playing for the Lions for several years. And disruptive on the field, but also disruptive off the field. And we only liked one of those two things. No, and I think if you think through all your sports, you can think of that. I know when I was in grade school in Indiana, it was Bobby Knight for IU basketball. Yeah, throwing chairs, And he just had to be like, and I was no fan of Bobby Knight or IU basketball, but there were people who would defend him up and down because he won games. I'm sure he got suspended more than once. It's been several years. Yeah, he was something else. But you understand that sort of thing where you do that. Some people even sort of take that pragmatic approach when it comes to politics. They may not like a politician's personal life. They may not like a single thing that they say or do, but they might be kind of like his policy. Or I like the fact that he annoys the people I like less. So he's a lesser of two evils sort of situation. I'm not saying that's exactly, obviously you'd rather have someone better. Samson by no means should be praised for all of his antics, but at the same time, you could understand the people of Israel being like, well, at least he's doing something, because no one else is. You'd rather have a King David, who is a man after God's own heart, who praises God, who puts God first and foremost, and is also your great military commander. But this is Samson. This is who they have at the time. So you do with him as you will. Samson's also self-destructive. You'd have to wonder if Samson actually buckled down and focused because he had done war during his lifetime. And my answer is yeah, absolutely he could have. So yeah, ADHD. I don't know if it's, yeah, maybe actually. I don't know. I don't want to diagnose people at the bottom with mental illnesses. That's a dangerous historical game to play. Anyway, so we're in Judges chapter. Last time we had that he burned down the fields with the foxes, animal cruelty added to his list, and then he also the girl he was going to get married and they got married to somebody else, the Timnite. Their house got burned down, and it says that he went and stayed at the cleft of the rock of Etam. In other words, he went to hide. And he went to hide at a cleft in a rock. What is a cleft? Yeah, like a split or a gap. So it's quite literally going up into the caves and hiding. This helps understand what's going on here, is because they don't send just anyone to go through it. They send people from the tribe of Judah who would know the land better in order to find him. And it may be that Samson's going to sort of a cave that was a cave of refuge for the people of Israel in other times, so it was a known hiding spot. Let's go ahead and read finally, and we'll read verses 9 through 13. We got this great moment here between Samson and the tribe of Judah. We're in Judges 15, verse 9. 15, 9, and I need a volunteer to read 9 through 13. Someone who's good at hide and seek would work here. Because Hampton's good at, just please someone read. All right, thank you.
The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The men of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" "We have come to take Samson prisoner," they answered, "to do him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Ethan and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." They said to him, "We've come to you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourself." Agreed, they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up to the rock.
Thank you. So what happens is the Philistines are attacking the tribe of Judah. If you look at this map that we have up here, the tribe of Dan, that's Samson's tribe, is up here, and it's just north of the tribe of Judah. So the Philistines are attacked by Samson, and they go and attack the wrong tribe of Israel. But likely to them, an Israelite is an Israelite. They don't really care that much. They're like, oh, hey, we're getting attacked by Samson. He must be the champion of the people of Israel. Let's go attack the Israelites. And the people of Judah are saying, we didn't do anything. And they didn't. So they're upset about this too, because they feel like they're being attacked unprovoked. And so they got the idea, like, we're going to go capture Samson. We'll take care of it this way. Now, what's interesting here is other judges, what do the other judges do when it's time to fight? Every single other one of them raised an army to fight. Samson raises no army. He's kind of a one-man army. But he doesn't lead in the same way the other judges do. The second thing is the tribe of Judah does not see Samson as the champion they can all get behind. Instead, they're saying the problem is Samson, not the Philistines. This is a very cowed people of Israel, especially the tribe of Judah, that they're saying, no, we're not even going to fight them. We're going to help the Philistines rather than help Samson, who is of our own, he's of the tribe of Dan. He's one of the Israelites. We're not going to help him. We're going to capture him instead. That's the situation that they have in here. So we see just how bad things are there. So we have that this army of Judah comes up, and like I said, they may have known where the hiding places were. That's why they were able to find him so quickly. They find him in the cave, and they're going to bind him and hand him over to the Philistines. And you get the sense that this is negotiations. So Samson's in the cave, maybe back a little bit into the cave. So if they're going to come in after him, they're going to come one at a time. And who wants to be the first guy in to go fight Samson? After all the people of Judah is like, can you come out? They don't want to mess with this guy. Which they don't. You really don't. So he makes a deal with them. If you don't attack me yourself, I'll let you tie me up. And as soon as we started, some people were like, oh boy, this is going to be fun. So they do, and it mentions that they are new ropes. Why do they mention new ropes? They're not worn, they're not brittle, they're not Houdini's ropes that are going to their little trick ropes there. These are real ropes, and they're binding them up with real ropes. Okay, this should be pretty good here. How many ropes do they use? 2 ropes. In case one fails, they have 2 ropes around this guy here. I like this about Samson. that Samson has this confidence about him that he's like, you know, let's start the fight against the Philistines with me tied up by 2 ropes. This will make it a little more fun.
Very fun.
I do. I like this. I like this thing. And this is the sort of thing, and maybe I've mentioned this before, but Samson, out of all the parts of the Bible, to me feels like this should be like the superhero movie. This does.
Like a Superman or something.
Yeah, exactly like that. And that's what he is. He's kind of the Hebrew Superman here. He's gonna go, okay, let's hear what happens here. Verse 14 through 17. Volunteer to read. Thank you.
As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, "With the donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With the donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men." When he finished speaking, he threw away his jawbone, and the place was called Ramath-Lehi.
Okay, and Ramath-Lehi means hill of the jawbone. So even though it calls the place Lehi before this, it was likely called it that way before because it's named after this battle where he takes out people with a donkey jawbone. You also get again here, Samson has this poetry about him. We noticed when he did his riddles, he had that poetry about him. And this is one where the English nails it. Because in the Hebrew, there is that same idea of wordplay here. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, or with a jawbone of donkey, I have made them donkeys. That's a good way to do it because heaps and donkeys are the same word in Hebrew consonant-wise. It has the same spelling, but it has different meanings. What do we call that in Hebrew? It's a homonym. Yeah, it'd be a homonym in Hebrew. So translating with the jawbone of donkey, I have made these guys donkeys. That's a good translation there. A more literal is with the jawbone of donkey, heaps upon heaps. Doesn't make sense to us. We're like, what was he saying there? It's saying I made them donkeys and also put them in, a heap of dead bodies. Got both of them there. Little clever saying. It says his arms became like flax that had been burned. What is flax? What? It's like a linen, so it's like burnt linen. I've never worn burnt linen, but I can't imagine it'd be very strong. That's the imagery they use for this. So yeah, they just pop right off. Okay, so that's the thing. The Philistines come up, they're shouting, "Ah!" And he goes, "All right, ready to go." And he strikes down 1,000 of them. The jawbone of a donkey, obviously not a normal tool of weapon. This is another thing with Samson. It appears that Samson goes around basically unarmed and just says, "Yeah, I'll be fine." And again, this confidence about the champion is just absolutely amazing. He's like, "I'll use my fist, I'll use the jawbone, I don't care what I use, I am going to go out there and I'm going to be awesome doing it." So he takes the jawbone of the donkey, strikes down 1,000 men. And again, why this hasn't been made into a major Hollywood movie that I can be disappointed with, I don't know yet. It wouldn't be biblically accurate, guys. I have no faith in Hollywood. Anyway, but why this hasn't? Because I could see Quentin Tarantino directing a guy slaying 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone and more in creative ways each and every time. And it leaves a lot to the imagination, but he just goes after them. So, that's the end of that's almost the end of the section here, but something happens in verse 18 that actually makes you like Samson. Maybe even more than you like him already. It's he actually prays. If you notice, this is the first time Samson prays, and we've been like 2 chapters in, and finally Samson prays to God, and notice the character of his prayer. And this is verses 18 through 20. Again, a volunteer to read.
Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakor, and it is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines.
Okay, thank you. So we have his very first prayer, and what does he pray for? Water. Which is absolutely amazing. Partly it's like, this guy's very physical, so he prays for a physical need. It's the first prayer that we have of him here. It says, you have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant. The word salvation there, usually we use the salvation as a term of deliverance from, sin, death, and the power of the devil. Here it's being turned as a term of deliverance from 1,000 men. A very powerful sort of way. We also have it here that in his thing where he says, I'm going to die of thirst and all this victory will be for nothing because I'm going to perish here. So God, how about you help me out? It's really kind of a unique prayer here. Yet, at the same time, God answers the prayer, and miraculously, he receives water right then and there. This guy's something else. He really is. And then it mentions at the end that he calls it Ek Hakor, which means the spring of him who called. So it's named after this moment as well. And he judges Israel for 20 years. And again, just to bring this up here, when it says judging and leading, we don't really see Samson doing any judging, like legal disputes, and we don't see him doing any leading. So this is maybe the most dubious use of this word we've had yet. We see him fight Philistines, and maybe that's what it means here. He fought Philistines. He was the champion of their army for this time. He embarrassed the Philistines for 20 years. So, and maybe that's as good as you're going to get during this time period here. Any questions on the jawbone, the spring, the prayer, anything on that? All right.
One thing about water, Pastor, water is a substance of life. You can go a long time without food, but not water.
Okay.
So that's a good point that you have the water, because it's a stand-in.
Mm-hmm. You can go a long time without food, but not a long time without water, water being the more important. And especially after a long battle, you're going to be exhausted. And again, sports is a good analogy here with the physical exertion. How long can a hockey player go without taking a break? They play him out on the ice for a couple minutes and then they sub him out because it's that physically demanding. Football, they have to take a stop every 10 seconds in order to let everyone catch their breath because it's so physically demanding. I know one of the roughest ones for me was wrestling. I wrestled in grade school, where you had a whole minute where you had to wrestle somebody, and, well, I didn't do very well, so it was hard. But it's like, even in battles, if we're looking at like ancient warfare, it wasn't like the lines clashed and they fought with their weapons of war for an hour at a time. They had to like sub out and rotate and take breaks. Here's Samson, strengthened by the Holy Spirit, maybe fought 1,000 men for who knows how long. And at the end, yeah, he was probably tired and thirsty and hungry. He needed something to refuel. He used everything he had.
You took the words out of my mouth. How long would it take to kill 1,000 people with a jawbone?
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, I don't want to read something that isn't into the Bible, but he's one guy. So you imagine they come to surround him, and even if he's doing, throwing things, smashing people, just causing mayhem, it's like he's going to have to chase some of them down, especially towards the end of this fight, because I can't imagine after the first 400 guys are defeated, everyone else is like, yeah, let's stay in the fight.
What I was thinking about was how skilled were his opponents.
That's a good question as well. If we're looking at the time period, a lot of the fighting is one-on-one. So you kind of line up one man against one man, and you would fight it out. And if you beat them, someone else would come to take their place, or if someone was wounded, what happened is they would kind of fall back and let someone else take their place. We're not too far off from the time period of the Iliad, if you want to think historically with the Greeks. So it's a lot of one champion against one champion. If you're carrying armor, you are not carrying it yourself. If you're rich enough to have like metal armor and such, you have an armor bearer who is along you carrying and taking care of your gear. So even though he strikes down 1,000 men, some of the combatants might have been more of like auxiliary. They might have been like armor bearers and other support personnel in the army. So, but yeah, it's still, this is not just sort of like, yeah, this is something that would take quite a while to do. Yes?
The seating capacity of the floor of our church is 500.
Yeah.
So that's that many twice. If you had to shake hands and say hello to everybody, to 1,000 people, you're going to be tired by the time that's over.
I like the idea that you're thinking Samson's handshake is about the time it would take for him. But yeah, I think that's the thing. He is powered by God to do this great thing. Oh man. See, this is the thing. I'm thinking of Easter Sunday now, and this is what I'm going to be thinking Easter Sunday for. It's like if I was Samson and they were the uncircumcised Philistine, it's going to be a rough Sunday for me to think about anything else now. So Easter Sunday, everyone look around, and double that. Come to both services so you can get the full appreciation of how many people this is. Go ahead, Kim.
Remember, he had long hair.
Yeah, he had long hair. So I hear Larry saying that on Easter Sunday, not only do I need to grow out my hair so no hair cuts through leg, but I also need to bring in a jawbone of a donkey as my visual aid, just for everyone who's here this Sunday. No one else will get it. I'm not going to explain. I'll just be there with long hair and a jawbone Easter Sunday. It'll be a good time. Okay. Judges 16 then transitions here again, where we can solve, this is the thing if you're looking at a heading, mine says Samson and Delilah. Delilah is famous in scripture for being a temptress. And notably, Samson's not going to be beat in battle. How is Samson going to be beat? By Delilah. By those womanly wiles. Because that's where he's weak. That's where he's weak. He's not weak physically. He is weak emotionally?
Physically?
What?
Physically?
Yeah, you're saying a word. I'm not hearing it back there. All right.
Romantically weak.
Romantically, there's the word. I was trying to hear what it was. Romantically weak. Yeah. He loves foolishly. We saw already he fell in love with the Philistine girl. That's against God's command. The next three verses are also unsavory for another reason. Let's see what Samson's doing. 16, 1 through 3. And we don't know how much time passes between his victory and this part here. There's 3 verses.
One day Samson went to the Philistine town of Gaza and spent the night with a prostitute. Word soon spread that Samson was there, so the men of Gaza gathered together and waited all night at the town gates. They kept quiet during the night, saying to themselves, when the light of morning comes, we will kill him. But Samson stayed in bed only until midnight. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the town gate, including the 2 posts, and lifted them up, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders and carried them all the way to the top of the hill across from you.
All right. So, I'm just going to show this on my map here. It doesn't have the city on here. Let's see, scroll up a little bit. Thank you. Yeah, okay. Just making sure that I have my map correct. Let's see. So what happens here is, I have my rivers right. Keyshawn. Yep. Okay. Good. So what happens is that is right about here on the map, the city of Gaza that he would have been at. So he's about. I'm pointing over here. About here-ish on the map is where the city of Gaza would have been. So, we obviously see again, he has a problem with lust, and so he goes and visits a prostitute in the Philistine city. This is also a bit of his confidence, that he's like, I'm just going to walk into the Philistine city because what are they going to do about it? It may also have been that, you know, this is giving too much credit to the Israelites, but maybe the Israelites would find it morally reprehensible if one of their leaders went and visited a prostitute, at least publicly. I don't know. It's Judges. It's messy. So what he does is he does this, and they set the ambush for him at the gates of the city, and I love it. He just picks up the gates and walks them away. Now, the gates would have been incredibly heavy. I don't know if anyone has ever tried to pick up a door, like a front door, all by yourself. It's something to kind of to do there. I know when we had it up here where we had that door for the 500th year of the Reformation, that thing was heavy. I remember when we brought it to the Breslin Center, And it's, I don't know how many guys it took to move that thing. I know we also had the really good support and the counterweights for it. But yeah, it was, I think. Pastor Dan, you were in charge of moving the door.
I put it away from my memory.
But at that moment, you were like Samson, carrying the doors around.
Without the hair.
Without the hair, without the hair, yes. But yeah, so this is an absolute incredible thing. The hill of Hebron, according to my note, was some 40 miles away. So yeah, he's just making a big point here, saying like, you want to keep me in your city, you want to kill me, you can't touch me. And I'm going to embarrass you again by removing the gates from your city. Because remember, everyone goes in through the gates of the city, so it's a very noticeable thing. Imagine if you came to church this morning and the front doors were all gone. It'd be very noticeable and cold in here. It's a big deal. And so they're just gone. They're like, well, where'd it go? And they're like, you see that guy walking away over there? You know, Samson's just carrying him. You know, they're not going to mess with him. And he puts them so far away, they're not getting those back. So yeah, he embarrasses them on top of all the other things. It's a short little section here. Any questions? Otherwise, we're going to move on to Delilah. All right. Quick question, Karen. Is it about this?
I was just thinking when you said about, it wasn't really a question, but it was a thought, you know. You were saying about, you know, if actually when you said about the door, usually you would have somebody to help you with it.
Yeah, he didn't need it. He didn't need it, and he needed several guys to carry a gate.
No, I'm saying usually you would need somebody to help you with it.
All right.
If you had a big door.
Hey, let's move on then. We're going to move ahead to 16, and we're going to do verses 4, just 4 through 6. It's a short segment, but maybe hold on to the microphone because I'll have you read again shortly again. Where we run into Delilah and everything that is going on with her. And this very much seems to be history repeating itself again, where we had Samson with his first woman that he wanted to marry. You know, she falls in order to threats of intimidation and betrays him. Here we'll have someone, the woman he loves, also betray him as well. So let's go ahead and read just 4 through 6, and then we'll talk. All right, thank you, Sue.
After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound, that one could subdue you."
All right, so first red flag here, are they married? No, they're not married. So, but he loves this woman as well. It says she's from the valley of Sorek. That would be what's on my map in the tribe of Dan. It would have actually been pretty near to where he was born. But by all means, it doesn't say she's a Philistine, but there's no reason to think that she's not a Philistine. The second thing is the lords of the Philistines come to her. There's 5 great lords of the Philistines, each offer 1,100 pieces of silver. It's very difficult to convert that kind of money to our current thing. One estimate I read said that it was about 3 years' wages, 1,100. So if it's 3 years' wages times 5 lords, that's 15 years' wages there. If you want to think about that way. Which, you're like, hey, that's my entire retirement. This sounds like a pretty good plan for me. Yeah, but other than that, we don't have much more about him. But they say this is the only way we can figure out it. We know that there's something about his strength that is unnatural. Because no one can do what he's doing. So figure out what it is. Okay, that's her job. She is what we would call a spy. She's in the employ for them. Now, I like the bluntness of this text. You know, how does she work her way into the thing? Just tell me, you know, how are you so strong? And how could somebody bind you? It's like, how do you ask that question without raising suspicion there? But you know, Samson hasn't shown himself to be the wisest when it comes to women. So this is his answer to her there. Verse 7. Whoever had the microphone, just keep reading, please.
Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man.
Keep reading to verse 9.
Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire, so the secret of his strength was not known.
Okay. So this is the part where you have to be like, what's in Samson's head here? Where he says, okay, I'm going to tell you a false one. Is he testing her? Because she fails the test. I mean, the end of this part is like he snapped the bowstrings and says, you've been unfaithful to me, and he kicked her to the curb and moved on with his life. You know, that seems to be the proper thing. That's not what he does. But yeah, obviously she is someone not to be trusted by this thing here. So is he testing her? Is he playing games with her? Is he amusing himself with this sort of thing? It's really unclear here.
Well, didn't he do that with the other people who he wanted to get the clothes from last?
I mean, yeah, he likes to play games.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a guy. Anyway, bowstring itself, bowstring at this time would have been taken from animal sinews and gut. And what you would do is you would string it out, which you can string that sort of thing out, and that's how you'd make a bowstring when you dry it with taunton, and you could use it in a bow. Bows in that day and era were very short range and not very accurate. We're not getting into the sort of bows you would use in siege warfare. That you won't get that till you hit the Assyrian Empire. So these aren't the greatest bowstrings, but at least you have some sort of ranged way to throw in. Notably at this time, you're more likely to see people throwing javelins, throwing spears, as opposed to shooting bow and arrow. Just because the bows and arrows are not accurate, they're not that powerful, but there's still an available choice for certain things. All right, so it doesn't work. I don't think it would work anyway. Not dried bowstrings is just kind of icky. And also, this is more sort of thing. How do you tie someone up in 7 bowstrings without them being aware? And my only thought is he must have been drunk. But he's told he's not allowed to drink any wine, so I don't know. Is he just a really good sleeper? There's a lot of questions. Is he aware of what's going on here? There's a lot to be. There's a lot of questions I have about this section that I don't have answers for, but it gives the characteristic of the relation. So this should have ended with Samson saying, "I'm breaking up with you, Delilah." Maybe just over text. She does not deserve. This is a bad sort of thing. So what happens here? Oh wait. Notably, one other thing that's been noted here is when this happens, it says the Philistines are behind you. She has men lying. It doesn't mention that he actually fights them. It may have been the Philistines are upon you, and when Samson popped the bowstrings, they all just said, yeah, no, we're not doing this.
Really, you want to go there?
All right, let's read verse 10. This might sound a bit familiar. 10 through 12.
Okay, they took the microphone.
Oh.
Nope. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies."
That is true.
Yep. "Please tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, But he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread.
There you go. And as you remember, this is what the tribe of Judah did. They bound him with 2 new ropes and it failed, so it's a repeat. Let's keep reading to verse 14.
Okay. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web, and she made them tight with the pin and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away from the pin, the loom, and the web.
Okay, so this actually gives us an indication about Samson's hair that we like here. That says he has 7 locks. How do you read that? What?
Hair curly or something? I don't know.
Think more like dreadlocks.
Oh.
So he's kind of got like 7 long sort of strands of hair like that. Don't think like Fabio where it's long, flowing, beautiful hair. Like I will grow out my hair for Easter Sunday. That's what my hair will look like. Think very much like it's very sort of bound that way. If you don't, hair will naturally do that if you just kind of let it be. You actually have to do a lot of work with the long hair to keep it flowing. And I probably don't have to tell anyone who brushes their hair daily this, but that's the truth of it. I know that's the thing I'm reminded with my very adorable 4-year-old daughter. There's some days where you don't brush your hair, and then the next time you have to brush your hair, it's like, ugh. It's difficult. And it's winter. Winter's the worst for her. She is like, you know those balls you touch with static electricity to make your hair stands up?
Yeah.
That's every object in our house for her. She's like next to the couch and all of her hair stands up. And it's like, she is adorable. I really, really like her. Anyway, but yeah. But that's the thing, if you get that. So his hair sort of has those 7, if you want to think of them as threads, but some sort of clumps in the back there. And so she weaves them together, and she is using a loom. So this is what they'd use to weave clothing there. So she weaves it into the loom, sticks a pin in it because it's done, and it's supposed to be there. So you can imagine his hair kind of being woven together like a scarf or a small baby blanket or something like that. That's how it is. Obviously this isn't a thing, but we notice that Samson here is very close to giving his secret here because he says his hair. And remember, the hair for him has to do with his vow as a Nazarite. The 3 things the Nazarites were not supposed to do to keep their vow before God was to not touch the dead, which he did. They were not supposed to take any wine or grapes, which I have no indication he did, though I'm suspicious. I'm very suspicious. And then the 3rd thing is not to cut his hair. And so while Samson is not really obeying most of the commands of God, he's keeping this one. And he somehow knows that, you know, it's this faithlessness. It's also notable, if you look at the vows of a Nazarite, when you completed your vow of the Nazarite, and if you were doing not a lifelong but a temporary, the way you showed you were done with your vow was you shaved your head. So it would be saying my vow is over if you do that. So this also is another indication that Delilah is of the tribe of Philistine. She doesn't know the vows of the Nazarites, though at this point I wonder who in Israel actually reads the Bible. In the book of Judges, it's a pretty bad time. So what happens is it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So she's been tricked 3 times, and Samson still hasn't gotten the clue that maybe I should not be with this woman. Just maybe. Why does Samson stay? Because he doesn't think straight. He has lustful intentions. He is a bad thing. This is the sort of thing where I'm sure everyone has experienced this, where 2 people are together and you're like, they're bad for each other. They really are. They make each other worse. I think high school was the worst for that. Then I got to college and it was even worse sometimes. I was like, oh my goodness, you 2 are just enabling each other's bad habits. And so she's bad for him. She really, really is. And so this is the sort of thing. So he has lied to her 3 times, and yet he still is there for whatever terrible reasons he's come up with. Notice during all this, Samson's not actually like doing anything he should. There's just a lot here. Okay, so what happens is he's finally going to give in, and this has to do with his other weakness, which we already found out with his first marriage, and his weakness is nagging. And as we said in the book of Proverbs says, it's better to be in a house with a dripping roof than to be in a house with a nagging wife. It's very true. It's in Proverbs, guys. It's in the Bible. Verse 15 through 17, please.
And she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies." And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart and said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." Well, how can she say, "I love you," if she continually tricked him too?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Is it because Samson really loves her? It makes him a bit of a tragic dummy. But I mean, that's the thing, is it seems to be that he has some sort of genuine love for her, makes up bad excuses to not move on. Yeah.
Love is blind.
Love is blind. More than one way. Love is stupid. Maybe that's the saying we need for this one. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is where you want Samson to have a friend to come up and put a hand on his shoulder and be like, "Hey, Samson. Yeah, let's go get a cup of coffee."
Samson.
Yeah, there's a lot here that is very troubling. But again, who is Samson's friend? He works alone. We never see him like kind of relying on anyone else. I do like the comment here in the ESV here where it says, "I shall become weak like any other man." Every other guy's weak. Man. There's something about this arrogance and love. Anyway, but yeah, he understands that this will be it. It takes days of nagging, but he finally gives in. And you have to wonder, how did he not see this coming? But he doesn't. So yes, not the wisdom of Solomon here. Okay, let's continue on, verse 18, and we'll read all the way through 22.
When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up again, for he has told me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in her hands. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison, but the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved.
Oh. Yeah, and so the very predictable yet very tragic end to Samson and Delilah there. She disappears from the story after this. So she somehow knows that this is the truth. Out of all the time she had done this, so she's finally saying, "Come up with the money. I guarantee it this time." They may have even been impatient with her at this point, you know. How many times will she get it wrong? Made her sleep on his knees, somehow resting on her lap as she sleeps. And has a man shave the 7 locks. Generally, if you're shaving in that area, you're using a straight razor, so it's just a shave. Again, he's a heavy sleeper, apparently. And then he goes out, not even realizing what's going on, and loses his eyes. This would be a common term for humiliation of prisoners. It makes them weak and unable to do anything. This is something they would do to other champions as well. And we'll even have one of the kings of Judah. Which king of Judah is it? Is it Zedekiah? I don't think that's right. One of the kings of Judah, this happens when he's captured and taken to Babylon. Someone's not shaking their head and saying I'm right, so I'm glad I'm right. We'll go with that. YouTube, don't fact check me. Anyway. But so this is not common to do here. When it says they take him to Gaza, that's the place where he took their gates. So he humiliated that city. They're going to humiliate him. They make him grind at the mill. That's women's work. So they make him do women's work since he's so weak and pathetic. So that's why they do it. But verse 22 has that note. But then the hair on his head began to grow again. Obviously, the hair is not giving him strength. But we understand that in this way he feels like, oh, it's sort of recommitting himself to the Lord. So, all right, we'll see what there. Any questions, comments? Go ahead.
In verse 19, where it says, in our translation, it says, having put him to sleep on her lap.
Yeah.
It made me think, I wonder if she's been drugging him, you know, because that would then really knock him out. And then they could do these things fairly easily.
It's an idea, and that's the thing, it's unclear. I like the idea, and that's why the thing is, like, I thought about, like, she getting him drunk every time, but then again, that's breaking that vow, which he would know that's breaking the vow, but I don't know. Yeah. That's one where I'm curious about. I feel like there's that detail there that I should probably, and this is the thing, is I should look at some rabbinical scholars. They might have some great theories that I'll disagree with, so I should look them up. Yeah. But yeah, I've been curious about that as well.
Just obviously, apparently they didn't want him dead because they could have just, you know, cut his throat or whatever.
Yeah.
If they're shaving his head, it'd be a lot easier to just cut his throat. And yet they must have wanted him alive.
Alive and humiliated? Yeah, there's some sort of level there. Go ahead, John.
I think the telling part of this for me is the verse where it says, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. So all these things have been done to him, but like God has now left Samson, and that's really where his strength comes from. It's not his locks and things, but and he had no awareness of that, which is kind of interesting too. Like it's like he was kind of playing around all along here and thinking nothing's going to happen, and he gave up the secret, but then God said, I'm going to leave you alone now, and let's see how that goes for you.
Yeah, well said. So yeah, very, very sort of tragic story. Let's go to the last part of Samson here, and wrap him up here. We'll read it as one section here. And this is the nice thing about Samson. We get a happy ending. And that's kind of good to see. A lot of the judges, we don't get happy endings for. You know, we think Gideon, we love Gideon, but you get to the end of Gideon and you're like, oh, come on, man. Jephthah's another one where you're very disappointed. He starts well, he finishes poorly. Samson, for all of his problems, finishes well. And it's worth reading this as one section here. Can somebody read 23 to the end of the chapter? Sorry. Okay.
Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice, and they said, Our God has given Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, Our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, Call Samson, that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. And Samson had said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he vowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had judged Israel 20 years.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Hey, this is the part where I try to do artwork. Alright, so the first thing is Dagon. So it says that they worship Dagon. Dagon, we actually know what he was like. What happened is he had the body of a fish, and then he had the top half of a man. So let's give him a head, and then he's got some arms. Yeah, there we go. And then he's fishy down here. So think like the Little Mermaid. Give him some hair, some eyes, frowny face. He's a bad god. Anyway, so there we go. So that's Dagon. So it's a fish god. This is because the Philistines are sea peoples. They're Phoenicians. That's their ancestry there. They were traders on the Mediterranean Sea who then settled across many of the port cities all along there. So this would be the god that they're worshiping there. He's probably a little more manly. Let's give him a little more manly here. That looks good. Yeah, okay, great. So that's their kind of god there. Dagon is an agricultural god too. He was supposed to help the crops grow. But they're chief god there. So they're gathered and they're celebrating in this sort of temple there for there. And it mentioned there's sort of pillars there. Now, this is something that has made some archaeologists wonder, because they're like, okay, so what sort of like temple are we looking at? Because if you go into the region where this took place, they haven't yet uncovered any archaeological ruins of a temple that looks like this. To be fair, it happened a really long time ago, and it's changed hands many times, so there just might not be any ruins to kind of unearth here. But if we look at other areas where the Phoenicians kind of settled, we have seen sort of these pillared temples. And what you would do is you would have a large courtyard, and what you would do is you'd have pillars all along the courtyard, and so it would kind of be like an open air pavilion, and then you'd have a roof over the top. And this seems to be what the thing was. So a large pillar thing, so you have pillars all around the outside, and then you have a roof over the top. Now, this has to be a pretty big place because it says that it's holding 3,000. And it says that they are also on the roof, which, why would you want to be on the roof? That's the cool place to be. So they must have had some sort of way of getting up to the roof here. So some sort of courtyard with pillars, so you have the air coming underneath, and then above you also have sort of roof seating or roof access of some sort of way. Again, not a ton of details on what this looks like. I'm going to make these pillars a little stronger here. There they go. They look much better now. Anyway, so what you would do is Samson is put between two of the pillars. So let me draw Samson there. Oh yeah. Got big shoulders. Yeah, there's it. Anyway, so he's between two of the pillars of there. Now, obviously, if he's going to bring down the whole building here, the thing is if you knock down two pillars, you can see how it can cause everything to collapse. Much in the storm sort of way, it's like if somebody just knocked down half of one of the walls of your house, it could cause a lot more destruction of other things collapsing into it. If a tree falls on your house, even though our houses are well built, you can see that. How much more there, where they're not using the same sort of support structures they are. It's a big slab over another slab, and then you have pillars all along it, and if any of those pillars go, get out of there. That is very, very dangerous. They're all important pillars. There's not a redundancy built in their design there. So that explains how you can knock out two pillars, and you can bring the whole house down. All right. So they wanted to bring up Samson. He's the entertainment because they're mocking him. I know there's part of me that because maybe I grew up watching too many cartoons, I think of them throwing fruit. I see them throwing tomatoes at him. I don't know why. There's no tomatoes even in this part of the world at the time, but I always picture them throwing tomatoes at him. I don't know why. Man, there's something wrong with me. Anyway, but that's what happens where they're mocking him in some sort of public way. But very much think like if you've seen like old cartoons with people in stocks. They used to put people in stocks in cartoons. Wow, that's kind of crazy. You know, it's a public humiliation thing. So don't think people are just sort of leaving them alone like, you know, don't touch the disgraced prisoner of war. He is there for your mockery. He's there for you to spit on him and throw things at him. So that's what it means by the entertainment there. Obviously, so then we have Samson calling to the Lord a second time. He says, O Lord God, please remember me, O God, that I may be avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes. Again, a very physical sort of thing. for my two eyes, a physical reaction there. But what he does in his prayer there, and this is not translated well into the English, he actually uses 3 different names of God here. He uses the word Adonai, which means Lord. He uses the name Yahweh, that name given to Moses, I am who I am, and Elohim, which is more generally just translated as God. He uses 3 different names of God, all in this one brief prayer here, and says, bring it down. Because despite all of Samson's flaws, he seems to be really good at words and praying. I'm impressed by this guy. I am impressed by his prayers. We only get like 2 of them, and they're both very good. He's asked that he dies with the Philistines. This is not like a seeking martyrdom. He understands he's as good as that. He's like, I'm going to do nothing else the rest of my life. I might as well do what I was sent to do, which was to save my people from the Philistines. And as it was said at his birth, before he was born, when God says it's like he will begin to save his people from the Philistines. This is the first act of that. Obviously, the destruction of all of these Philistines is a big blow to the Philistines. So it would hearten the people of Israel and maybe slow them down for a couple of years. And it even gives them time for his family to feel safe enough to retrieve the body and bury him with honors. That's Samson. Any questions, comments, alliterations? Go ahead.
I was just...
Later on, with David, all right, the Philistines captured the ark, and they took it back and they put it in their temple with, I think, the same God, isn't it, Dagon?
It's Dagon again.
And he falls over or something?
Yeah, so that's a wonderful thing. It's 1 Samuel 4, where they capture the Ark of the Covenant, because the people of Israel try to use it like a weapon or a trump card. And they put it in Dagon's temple, and they leave it there overnight, and the next day Dagon's down, and they're like, oh, a breeze must have blown over our giant, massive statue, because that's totally happened. And then the next day they came, and Dagon was on the ground again, and his head and hands were removed. So you see, like how you would execute a king, God executes the idol of Dagon, and then the whole city gets the plague. And they're just like, let's get the Ark of the Covenant out of here. And they send it to another city, it gets the plague, and then they send it to the 3rd city of the Philistines. They're like, no, we're smarter than you guys. We're not taking this thing. But yeah, that's 1 Samuel. All right, Karen, you got the last word for us?
Yeah.
All right.
What I was going to say was, because you were saying, that, Samson, no hard feelings against it, but I was just thinking that if Samson, he didn't basically follow what God's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead. Looking ahead, before we pray and dismiss, so next week we have a voters meeting during this time period, talking about the building proposal and going in more detail with that, talking about fundraising. Should take about an hour to get through all that material. In 2 weeks we'll be back in Judges, and we'll be looking at the epilogue to Judges. Now the epilogue consists of 2 different stories that happened during the time of Judges, not following a particular judge. And the first one you're going to read that, I'm like, man, the people of Israel really are screwed up and don't know what they're doing. And then you're going to read the second one, like, oh, they're even worse. So that's what we have to look forward here. We said the trajectory of Judges is a downward trajectory. We're not all the way at the bottom yet. This is Samson. We still have further to go, which we'll talk about in our epilogue here. It's going to get worse. It doesn't get better. So yeah, but we're near the bottom now. Getting close to rock bottom. All right, takeaway here. One thing that should be noted here, and I guess this is my actual last word, is Samson, some people put him as a type of Christ, and saying that he foreshadows Christ. How so? His last act of life, what does he do? He is stretched out between the 2 pillars, as Christ was stretched out on the cross, and Christ on the cross defeats death and sin. And so they say in the same way Samson foreshadowed that, because stretched out, he gave his life for his people in the same way. And that's the sort of thing. I see some people are going, I don't know about that. It's a bit of a stretch, yes it is. But I'm saying if you look at the early church fathers, they would point to this and they'd say, no, we see Christ here in this. Okay, I'll leave you with that thought. Let's pray. Dear God, I think my microphone just stopped. I really am done with class today. Yeah, the battery just died. Did we get the new batteries that time out exactly at an hour? That is truly amazing technology. Let's pray. Dear Lord God, they ask that we continue to bless your study of the word. May we be faithful, and we may not only call upon you in our times of distress, but at all times, and live lives holy and pleasing to you. This we pray in your name. Amen.